Ethan never thought the night would begin with a call that would change the rhythm of his life. He was sitting in his small Seattle apartment, half listening to the rain tapping against the window, his mind drifting through the usual silence that filled his evenings. When his phone lit up with a number he hadn't seen in years, it took him a second to remember the names behind it. Aunt Claire. He hesitated before answering. "Ethan!" Her voice came through warm, familiar yet strangely fragile. "It's been too long." Before he could respond, another voice slipped onto the line. Aunt Margaret. Calm, measured, carrying that quiet authority that always made people listen. "We were hoping you could do something for us," she said. "Not a chore, not a favor, something different." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" There was a pause long enough for him to hear Claire inhale softly, as if she were gathering courage. "We'd like you to come stay with us, for a week. Not as family, not as someone you owe visits to, as company, as someone who might understand us, more than most." The words hit him like a small stone sinking into deep water. Ripples spread quietly through his chest. It was such a strange request. A week at their old lake house, with two women he barely knew beyond childhood birthdays and postcards. Yet there was something in their voices, a tremor, a longing, that stopped him from saying no. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Margaret replied. "If you can." The call ended, leaving Ethan staring at the dark screen, the hum of the city outside suddenly distant. He wasn't sure why he agreed. Maybe it was curiosity, or the way they'd said, "need you." By morning, he had packed a bag and was driving north. The highway stretched long and wet under a pale sun. Pines framed the horizon, mist rising from the hills. He told himself it was just family, just a visit. But a quieter part of him whispered that it wasn't. When the lake house finally appeared through the trees, its windows glowed warm against the gray light. Claire was waiting at the door, hair loose, sweater falling off one shoulder. She rushed forward, hugging him with a sudden intensity that caught him off guard. "You're here," she said, her smile trembling. Margaret followed from behind, graceful as always, her presence calm but commanding. "Come in, Ethan. You must be tired." Inside, the house smelled of cedar, lavender, and something sweet baking in the oven. A fire cracked in the hearth, throwing shadows that danced across the walls. Claire busied herself with tea, her laughter a little too quick, while Margaret watched him quietly, as though measuring the distance between who he'd been and who he'd become. Over tea, they asked him about his dreams, his regrets, his quiet moments. They spoke, too, about loneliness, the passage of time, the way life could make people invisible. The more they shared, the more Ethan felt something subtle shifting beneath the surface. This wasn't family talk. It was confession, intimate, fragile, and unguarded. And as the firelight flickered across their faces, he felt the first quiet pull of something he couldn't yet define. The second night in the lake house began with the soft crackle of firewood and a silence that seemed to breathe. Ethan sat on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, his thoughts circling like the rain still whispering outside. The firelight flickered over the room. Over Claire sitting cross-legged on the rug, her eyes glinting with mischief, and Margaret in the armchair across from them, calm, upright, her gaze steady. It didn't feel like family, not anymore. It felt like three people caught in a moment that none of them knew how to name. Claire broke the silence first. "Do you remember the last time we saw you? You were 16, so quiet, always in your own world." Ethan smiled faintly. People change. Margaret tilted her head, her tone softer but edged with something that carried weight. Yes, they do. Sometimes more than they realize. Her eyes stayed on him a little too long. It wasn't unsettling. Not exactly. But it made the air between them hum. Claire refilled his glass before he could protest. Her hand brushed his wrist, lingering just long enough for warmth to bloom where her fingers had been. Ethan said nothing, but the gesture lodged itself somewhere deep inside him. They talked about everything and nothing. About the past, the places they had lived, how the house had grown quieter over the years. Claire's voice carried laughter, but her laughter carried loneliness. Margaret spoke less, but every word she offered landed with purpose, shaping the space around them. When the fire popped, Ethan caught his reflection in the window, framed between the two women, both watching him with a kind of open tenderness that felt unfamiliar. He had come here expecting obligation, but now it felt like something else entirely. Connection, fragile and strange, but undeniably real. After a while, Margaret leaned forward. "Tell me something," she said. "What is it you really want from life? Not a job, not security, something deeper." The question hung in the air like incense. Ethan hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I guess. I want something that feels real, not just noise, not just routine." Claire looked down, her fingers tightening around her glass. "Then you're just like us," she murmured. Her words were soft, but they carried truth. The kind that reaches a place language rarely touches. Margaret's gaze softened, and for a moment, all three sat in silence, each lost in the reflection of what had been said. Or perhaps what hadn't. When Ethan finally rose to leave, Claire reached for his hand. "Don't disappear so early," she said gently. "It's nice, having someone here who listens." He smiled faintly, unsure of what to answer. "I'll see you in the morning." As he walked down the hall, he could still feel their eyes on his back. In the quiet of his room, Ethan sat on the bed, his pulse unsteady. He wasn't sure if it was guilt, confusion, or something more dangerous. But he knew this much. Something in the lake house had shifted. He just didn't know yet whether it was toward healing or toward something he couldn't take back. By the third evening, the lake house had changed its rhythm. The rain had stopped, but the air still held the hush that follows a storm. Ethan sat by the window, watching the light fade across the water. He told himself he should leave, that this visit had already stretched beyond comfort. Yet something in him refused to move. When he finally returned to the living room, the fire was already lit. Claire sat curled on the couch, barefoot, a blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Margaret stood by the fireplace, her reflection flickering in the glass. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was deliberate, like a held breath. Claire looked up, her voice soft but clear. "You've been quiet today." Ethan hesitated. "Just thinking." "About leaving?" she asked, though the question sounded more like a plea. He didn't answer, and in that pause, Margaret turned toward him. "You don't have to go yet," she said, her tone calm, but her eyes carried the faint tremor of someone bracing for honesty. "There's something you should understand before you do." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Understand what?" Claire stood then, crossing the room slowly, the firelight catching the tiredness in her smile. "When we asked you here," she began, "it wasn't out of habit or family duty. It was because this house has been too quiet for too long. We've been too quiet." Margaret nodded slightly, finishing her thought. "We thought inviting you might remind us what connection feels like. Real connection, not small talk, not the kind people use to fill time." Their words sank deep. He saw it then, the loneliness that had filled every corner of the house. The reason for the long phone call, the strange tone in their voices, the way they looked at him like he was more than just a guest. "I didn't realize," Ethan said quietly. "I thought you just wanted company." Claire smiled sadly. "We did. But company turns into something deeper when people actually listen. You listen." He didn't know what to say. A warmth spread in his chest, compassion mixed with unease. For the first time, he saw them not as distant relatives, but as women trying to hold on to meaning in a life that had started to feel too empty. Margaret stepped closer, her voice low. "Do you see now? This week wasn't about family. It was about truth, about seeing one another, without judgment." Ethan met her gaze, then Claire's. In both, he saw gratitude and something harder to define. Not desire exactly, but longing to be known, to be remembered, to matter. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight lift just enough for words to return. "Then maybe," he said, "that's what we all came here for." The fire cracked, the lake sighed against the shore, and for the first time since he arrived, the silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt understood. A story like this leaves a question hanging in the air. How much connection is too much before it becomes something else entirely? Tell me what you think. Can loneliness ever justify crossing a line?